Hey everyone, it's JC, product designer and developer. And today we're here with Toby for another episode talking about ChatGPT apps and MCP apps and anything around MCP. Today we want to take a deeper look at what other teams out there have been encountering and basically concluding around how to best go around building ChatGPT apps. So Toby has done some digging and he has some interesting findings that he's now willing to share with everyone watching. So Toby, why don't you tell us a bit more about this?
Sure. Well, so I'm Toby from CEO of Encore Design, where we're always looking at interesting things going on in the MCP app space. What I thought I'd like to talk about today was really trying to sort of pull together some of the learnings that people have had about building apps. It isn't a huge sort of surface area of people that build apps that have been published. There's a lot of people that build them, MCP apps, that building that sort of using locally or internally. But there's not been a lot of people who've actually built them and had them published by OpenAI yet, as far as we know. So it's around about 150, 200, I think, have been published so far, last time I checked. There's two groups of people that have been doing some of these things. So the first group was Alpic. So Alpic is a French company that's built the Skybridge framework, which helps you build MCP apps really easily. It kind of takes a lot of the pain away, and it's a nice library to use to get going fast. And they're very big in the space. They put a lot of events on. Nice people. They've able to share some learnings. Actually, let me just share the article. They recently published, I think it was beginning of February. They published an article which was published on the OpenAI blog, which talks about some of the lessons they've learned. Share that now. Um, and um, and there's some really good stuff in here. I think, it's predominantly their focus here was the quite technical side, I guess, coming from when they're thinking about the libraries and framework they've created. So that's quite some key parts. Lazy loading, talking about how the fact that you need to think about how the data is optimized in terms of bringing on board. Some of the things you need to think about in terms of the interactions. And also the UI. I think one of the big challenges, particularly, is the movement between the AI, the UI sort of display modes. You've got inline, you've got, and again, at the moment, I'm really talking about OpenAI, I think, probably, in ChatGPT apps. We've got these three modes: inline, full screen, and picture. And, how do you work with those and how the user flits between them? You need to really think about one of the challenges we've seen a lot, we've talked about in the past, JC, is when you're in one of those modes and you change what you want to look at, not many apps really take some of these changes into account. The movement between the different modes, the user can do, and you need to really make sure that the information they're pulling back from your MCP, it is managed by the widget really well. So that's certainly a big challenge that we've seen personally. Sorry, Jesse, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that we've seen more and more apps using the three UI display modes, right? Like this picture-in-picture, inline, and full screen. We see them using those modes a bit more frequently, but from our experience, it's always a bit kind of not perfect in terms of UX. So I would be curious to see whether that is something that needs some more work on the developer side or on the OpenAI SDK, or what might be the issue. I don't know if you've seen something here that tells you or signals like what the issue might be on how these experiences might break when displaying these different modes.
No, I mean, it's not clear to me, to be honest. I haven't seen a clear pattern yet. I just feel like there's not enough thought going into the movements between the different UI modes and testing of that. It feels like they just do one. I mean, to be honest, I haven't really seen a lot of really standout, unusual usage of their UI, but I mean, it's still pretty early and there's not been a lot published. So there may be some really amazing things out there that we just haven't seen yet.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, we did a couple episodes on Tonita ChatGPT app and also All Trails and Udemy's ChatGPT app. And they were using in different ways. They were using some of these new display modes. So if you're curious about these display modes in action, then you can go check those episodes in our channel. Sorry, go on.
No, sure. And I think well, it's just about the things they bring up, again, more technical things, that this idea of the content security policies. So this is something, again, quite technical, but it's important. The MCP apps really control what the content is that comes in, and you have to set things up properly to make sure that there isn't bad actors coming in, putting content in that's not expected. So it's one of the things you have to really think about as you build these things. And I think generally that there's this article really, as I say, is talking about sort of more technical side of things, which is important. But obviously, at the end, I think it talks about how, hey, all this becomes easier if you use their framework. So it's kind of true how they help with a lot of the stuff, and it does make it all easier. So it is a good thing to check out if you're trying to build an MCP app. The other thing that I think is probably worth, the other article that was interesting for me was an article that really came out from a podcast, Elliot from Ghost Team at Discoverability, and Hannah from Fractal. So these guys were talking about, they built a lot of apps, I think over 100 they built together. And what, Elliot's really focused on discoverability apps and how that's going to kick in, because that hasn't really been switched on by OpenAI yet. And Hannah's Fractal product is really about helping you build MCP apps really easily without kind of like a no-code tool for building MCP apps. So again, different perspective. And these guys were really focused, I think, predominantly on more of a playbook, not so much on the technical side, more about how you think about things, particularly around the paradigm shift of the fact that, and this is something we've talked about before, I think, JC, these are not the same as an app as you could currently use it. The way that I could think about this is that MCP apps are kind of deconstructed apps. A lot of the functionality is broken out and, into a series of tools that you don't really have control over how they get called in what order. That's really decided by the model. And you need to really think about how that means. The model isn't really in control of all of this. And so you have to be able to handle the different switches and going from one to another out of order than maybe what you would expect it. Sorry, Jesse.
Yeah, and the interesting part is that the model will decide what to switch on, as you're saying, like the switches. It will decide what part of the app or the product to switch on and to show to the user based on the relevance of the context, right, of the conversation. So I think the paradigm shift that we are now looking at is basically it is not a search-based experience where the user expresses what they wanna, what world they wanna tap into by searching and then entering that world, but rather they express an intent, or the LLM needs to pick up on that intent from the user, and then only then the right product or the right app gets surfaced for the user at the right moment.
Yeah,
which is a completely different
exactly.
way of thinking about this, right?
It is a bit of a shift. I think it's an initial tendency of most people is just to stuff their entire app into MCP apps, but then you lose this whole ability to kind of leverage the model and the data, the context that it's bringing in, and the interaction with it. I think one of the things that Hannah and I talk about is that you can leverage ChatGPT's intelligence and even other MCP tools. You could be pulling data from one MCP, processing it a bit by the model, and then being fed into your app for them doing further work and back again. So there's a lot of sort of value that comes from that being in the context of the model and the model itself that, I think really, really successful MCP apps will need to really tap into. So I think that's going to be another thing. The other area I think that's going to be interesting, and obviously this is one of Elliot's really focuses, is discoverability. I think he's got a bunch of interesting perspectives on this, but I think the challenge right now is that discoverability isn't really available in the App Store. I think the discoverability comes to the OpenAI App Store. The best discoverability really at the moment comes from simply type, you have to put the name in of the app you want to use and switch and activate it. It isn't suggested yet by OpenAI. And I think they're working on that, but they haven't enabled it yet. So there's a lot of, I get that's probably the reason why they haven't switched a lot of apps on yet. They've still got a pretty big backlog, I think, of apps that are waiting to be published.
Right.
But I think discoverability is a big issue.
It is, and I think it's the whole point of this new paradigm shift, right? Like when you enable discoverability in ChatGPT apps or whatever other environment comes next, then you're unlocking a whole different way of interacting with apps and products for users. So that's really when I think things will start getting traction and more companies will be able to monetize the content. I will be curious to know, I don't know if you read anything around this, but how could that work in terms of how do I make my app more discoverable? So right now we have different, if we think about today's world of apps, for example, in the App Store, we have ASO strategies that you need to kind of care about in order to bump up your app, right? So you want to have some metadata for your app. You want to have certain quality for the images, certain keywords. So there are things that you can do. Also strategies more on the, like create some in-app events or things like this. So I would be curious to know if, for example, Elliot or the Ghost team, they are thinking about this, or if they have any recommendations on things that you
Oh, I
can
mean,
start doing today.
yeah, I mean, they talked a bit about this in Paris, in their conference we went to. I think they've got some interesting ideas. I think a lot of it, I'm obviously saying metadata is important, description of your app is important for sure. I think Elliot's got some of the things he's thinking about is ratings, how people rate it, usage of it. I mean, the difficulty is a lot of this is up in the air. No one really knows. And I don't, to be honest, because they haven't published it, I don't even think that OpenAI know yet exactly how it's going to work. When we spoke to them, they were saying that they had a big problem because they actually tried to activate the discoverability feature late last year in the US. And a lot of people hated it because they thought it was ads. So they went back to the drawing board a bit and try to figure out, because I believe that what they're trying to do is they're having a model which basically kind of is monitoring the conversation, or at least when I say monitoring, is the one that's kind of taking the context and trying to suggest things that are correct, taking a bunch of data. And I think in their documentation, they talk about a bunch of things that will have impact for discoverability, including the quality of your UX, probably responsiveness is going to have some impact. I mean, it's a bit like SEO at the moment. There's going to be a bunch of sort of variables that will be important, but until it gets switched on, it's hard to know. And even when it gets switched on, it will change because
Right.
as people try and game it and try and optimize for it, they'll have to improve it because it's going to be such a valuable thing. I mean, there's not much point having these 800 million weekly active users to use your app if they can't find it. So, they're going to need to be methods to do that. I think the other thing to bear in mind, which surprised me, and I think I mentioned this before, when we were at the conference, they talked about how ads will not impact discoverability, which I find surprising. I mean, I can understand it because they don't want to compromise the experience, but it was surprising that they wouldn't do that. So anyway, I think it's something I think a lot of people are waiting for, and it's got some really good perspectives. And I think we're going to try and get him on to talk more directly about scalability
That
and
would
get
be
his
great.
thoughts on that. So I think that would be cool. But yeah, it's something I'm super interested to see how it develops over the next weeks, months.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, what developers who are trying to publish ChatGPT apps can already do or start doing is basically, I think the one lesson I'm getting from this is that the UX is something they can already be working on, right? And making sure that the app is solid in that sense. So yeah, I think that would be something that could already help and put you in a very good position for when discoverability really
Yeah, and
kicks
I
in.
guess that in the same way that Alpic kind of pushed their framework, we should probably talk about our framework and about the UX side of things. And that I think one of the things that we try and do is, when we talk to a lot of people, the UX and thinking about how you break up your app is one of the hardest things people have. I mean, there's so many good frameworks like Alpix to generate the actual MCP parts. It's what you put in there is the hard bit right now for all the people. And that's one of the things that we've been really focusing on, is trying to help people break it down, the ideas and how to piece it together. So yeah, anyone out there needs any help on the UX side, let us know, because that's something that we're more than happy to talk to you about.
All right. Toby, what else is interesting in this article?
I think I've covered the main things that I really picked out. I mean, there's some good stuff in there. It's worth, maybe we should put the links to the articles in when we publish the video. But I think so people can read themselves. But I think there's some good stuff in there, and there's going to be more stuff coming out. But obviously, both these groups of people have built a bunch of stuff and are worth getting their insights for when you build your own.
That's great. There's one line that I see here on Elliot's post, which is number 3. Don't start by listing features and building tools. Start with use cases. What will people actually type? I think this is, again, going back to the UX side of things, and what we are really focused on is we see a lot of these companies and developers just basically transporting everything they have on their APIs into a ChatGPT app, and they overlook certain aspects of what is the user intent, right? So we are seeing more and more how this becomes the central piece, like the keystone for any good ChatGPT app or MCP app. So I'd like just to highlight how important that is, that line number 3 from Elliot, and underline that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I just like to reiterate, I think that is the key thing to this. The technology itself isn't super hard. You're building effectively an app, a web app inside ChatGPT. That is relatively easy to do in a whole different ways. The challenge is mapping the UX onto that. You've got these different pieces made. You've got to start with the user experience or start with the user flow. That's true. But you then have to really think about how that maps onto, these different modes of usage, full screen, inline, picture in picture, and how you move between those throughout your user journey and try to get, and also how to leverage the context itself. I mean, one of the things I think Elliot talks about is that, one of the articles talks about, there's the LLM itself knows a lot about you, and the OpenAI does actually provide a lot of information, your location, some things about that it allows you to know, your app to know, and so you can really leverage that. There's a lot that can be done that we're not really unlocking yet in a lot of these apps, and I think it would be interesting to see how that happens, how that increases over the next period.
Definitely. Well, we'll be here to discuss that. Thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with us, and see you on the next one.
Cool. Thanks, Stacey. Talk soon.